that are here. I am going to introduce them now, and also Adecco, especially also that also help us also to launch this event, this side event during COP27. Just some small reference to IOE, the International Organization of Employers. I think we have another panelist joining. Thank you very much, Mr. Jotin from Tata. That is Roberto. So the mic has to be like that. No, that's better. Okay. Okay. So we have more or less 1 hour. I'm going to be as German as I can, but I have to confess that I'm Spanish, so I will be somehow flexible. What we want is an interactive dialogue, a very informal dialogue among ourselves on something that we feel is missing here, is the skills debate, the skills angle, the skills priority for COP27. We feel that there are some organizations that are really pushing also to have much more awareness about the importance of having a skills policy much ahead in these conversations. But still, we are not getting there. And there's some data that Karim be sharing with us about precisely this. What I can tell you is that according to the ILO, and I'm looking now to one colleague who is going to participate from ILO, 100 million jobs can be created or are dependent of the right skills, and these right skills are not there. If you look at the NDCs, the national contributions, the skills angle is still not there. I mean, the skills action plans are not being foreseen, but also I have to say that employment policies, because you can have the skills, but you don't have efficient employment policies, are lagging behind in these conversations. So what we have with us, and I need to wear my glasses, otherwise I'm lost. Forgive me about that. After 50, this is what I have. Is five important representatives. The first one is Karin Reuter from Adecco Group, the head of sustainability and ECGs. We also have from the Global Commission of Climate Change in South Africa, Dr. Tuli Khumalo. Thank you for joining us. We have Vic van Vuren, who is the director of the enterprise department in the ILO, very much also dealing with what we call green jobs. We have also with us a representative of the European Reconstruction and Development Bank, Madame Barbara Rambosek. Thank you very much for joining us. We have also an important representative of the C40, and she will refer also what C40 is about, which is about cities and the urban connection of climate change. Thank you very much, Cassie Sutherland, the managing director, and thank you for joining us. You just arrived today. And also we have an important representative, an very important company in India, which is very much ahead also in climate change anticipation, who is Mr. Jotin Kuti from Tata Motors. So thank you all of you for joining us. I will start now with Karin. Karin, tell us about how you see COP27, how you see the different discussions, but more importantly, decisions that are taken, but bearing in mind the skills angle, bearing in mind the employment policies angle. What is missing? What is needed?
Thank you, Roberto, and welcome to everyone here. And it's good to meet some friends, old and new. I mean, it's great to have the panel today because it shows that the topic of skills is moving up on the agenda, but there's still very much a lack of prioritization. We see it in the national declared contribution by countries, where particularly from OECD countries, only 40% mention the topic of skills, and only 15% mention the topic of active labor market policies. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to really accelerate activities. But what's also the case, it's not just on the government side, but also on the employer side. I think the topic of skills is hugely underestimated, and particularly the scale and speed that is required. We've recently done a survey of about 35,000 workers across the globe, both in office and non-office jobs, and 60% of those that we interviewed said that they fear that they will lose the skills and need to be up and reskilled over the next coming years. 50% are afraid that they're going to lose their jobs, but only 30% feel that they're actually supported by their employers. So it clearly shows that employers need to do a lot more in terms of mapping out the skills that they will need in order to make the green transition happen and truly transform their businesses, but also in creating transparencies with their workers. Because if workers are feeling left alone, they're undertaking their own activities to upskill and reskill themselves, but it might often not be what the labor market actually needs. So that's where, for me, really the role of employers is incredibly important to accelerate the topic, and not just in a few years, but actually today. And I think related to that, is then also the question of investments. And I think right now everybody talks about investments in R&D and new technologies and infrastructure, but not in upskilling and reskilling. So when we talk about political funds or public funds, there needs to be an element of skilling involved in there. And the same on the employer side. Most employers still see investments in their people as a cost and not an investment, because that's how it's being treated on the balance sheet. But they need to recognize that this is truly an advantage and a point for differentiation, as well as the future resilience of their business. So what we need is more prioritization of the topic per se. We need more policies around this, and we need more funding.
Thank you very much, Karin. I think one of the questions you raised is the perception of security in employment, isn't it? I mean, you gave us a figure, which is 60% of employees in your survey could fear losing their jobs. At the same time, you're saying, well, employers are not as ready. I mean, and I'm representing employers to make the investment, to make the cost. What is the element that you would think is refraining them to make the investment? I mean, yes, of course, there is a perception that this is a cost, this is not a short-term return, but there might be, other reasons. Perhaps the fact that sometimes there's no access to training facilities, which are employment services also. I mean, there are other elements that are complex and where we could make a difference if we push for a policy agenda which is much more ambitious.
Absolutely. I think what we need is much more of an ecosystem approach as well. I think there needs to be closer collaboration between employers, between educational institutions, and as well as with governments. We need to sort of lower the barriers to access to work, particularly for youth. So we need to make sure that the transition from education into employment through work-based learning schemes, through apprenticeships, is really accelerated as well. I mean, Switzerland is sort of known for its apprenticeship schemes. So we really need to find ways to scale that into other markets as well, and really accelerate sort of the transition from education into the labor market. And that's where employers have a key role as well in terms of looking at the skills that they might need, but it's not just about hiring people with a ready-made degree, but also offering opportunities through work-based learning schemes.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll come back. Vic, the ILO is a very known organization in many areas, and one of the areas in which you have been undertaking work, is all that has to do with the skills, green skills. Also, there's the concept of green jobs. I'm not personally very fan of the concept green jobs as such. I think that greening jobs is much more accurate than green jobs. It's difficult to make such a distinction. One of the initiatives that you have just launched has to do with youth and the youth component of jobs, which is also especially critical for climate change anticipation. Can you elaborate and give us, some insights on what you are planning?
Thank you. And I think to start off with, one needs to recognize that at the COP meeting like this, dealing with the technological advances, the solar panels, the hydrogen, is a very scientific kind of debate and technical debate. The people side of things are on the back row. And that's a worry, because we've got 1 billion people that are sort of engaged in this debate or aware of it. There's 7 billion that don't know what's going on. And unless we pull in the 7 billion, and that includes the youth, for the future, we're not going to achieve the targets that we want to achieve. So at the ILO, we're launching here at COP with the UNEP and UNICEF, UNICEF Generation Unlimited, the Green Jobs for Youth Pact. And this is an initiative that's starting to look at a specific entry point into engaging the youth. The youth are part of this discussion, and looking at how can we create 1 million jobs for youth to start with. Where can we identify opportunities? Let's create 1 million. And then we can say, right, we've done that. Then how do we scale up and how do we get this to different heights? We're looking at 10,000 young entrepreneurs that we want to introduce. There's a lot going on out there, but we want to say, let's target and show that we've achieved 1 million. Let's show we've achieved 10,000 entrepreneurs. And let's just keep building on that together with all the other initiatives. Now, what is important is the social partners' role in this, and in particular the private sector. We need the private sector to be part of this discussion because that's where the jobs are going to be created in the future. And that is why they are built into the advisory board of how we take this forward. And the companies that will need to roll this out, we need to get onto the platform where we can engage with them. We need the youth in the employment area. We need the youth in the trade union leaders. We need them to come together and be part of this discussion. So it's an inclusive process and a catalyst that we want to use. We don't see it as the be-all and end-all to the future solutions, but it's one of those initiatives that I think is exciting, one that if we can get it going with creating a space for best practice, one that we can then use for scalability. And the whole thing is about how do we get to scale? And how do we keep the people side on the agenda?
Okay, thank you. And you can count also with us. I mean, you know that, okay? With our commitment and our support, but you are also the director of enterprise, okay? And you referred to the private sector engagement. How you can help us to help you to get these 1 million jobs? I mean, what can we do, or what you can do for us, for enterprises, to create the jobs? I mean,
the relationship's got to be where we use our global footprint, and the global footprint of the IOE that goes to all the continents. And if we can use that footprint and the existing knowledge of the corporates through the IOE, that is where we're going to reach the scale and reach the activities. And so the enterprise department will not be able to reach all corners of the world as we can through the IOE. And I think the capacity building of the employer organizations that work with the companies and giving them the tools to work with companies is going to be part of the solution.
That's a very important point, because we are very proud in IOE of saying, well, we have independent and representative employers organizations. One of them is BUSA, by the way. We have a representative here. But I have to acknowledge that many of them are not at all ahead in these conversations. Are not ahead also. I mean, some of them have the expertise for climate change. They are now looking at, I mean, you can have many of them present here, but it's not exactly that they are also aware of the employment angle and again, the skills and the help and support of ILO can be also very important also to get that there. So, Barbara, the European Regional Bank for Development and Reconstruction is a very known institution for many years. I mean, and it has done amazing and incredible work in terms of financing countries, but also the private sector, I have to say. And we know, and that's the reason why we brought you here, and thank you again for joining us, that your work also on green skills, on job creation for climate change activation is not minor, okay? We would like to know more about that, and also perhaps to see how we can identify future action with you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here today. At EBRD, we actually invest 75% of our investments into the private sector, so the private sector is a key counterpart for us. And in this context, a focus on skills, on green skills, on human capital development is essential. In fact, we have three key strategic priorities as a bank overall. One is an investment into green, another into human capital, into people, skills, and a third one into digital. And of course, they're not mutually exclusive. So we need to combine the two, or the three. And certainly when we look at climate change and human capital development and skills and equality of opportunity, this is very, very central to what we do. So how do we do that? As an investor, I think we can play an important role, actually bringing together some of the things we've heard before about making the business case to our clients why investing in skills is important also for us as an investor, because companies stand and fall with the workforce that they have. And then also help them do that in a high quality way, helping them to forge partnerships with schools, with universities, with vocational training providers, and then also shape policy. So we have been working with our clients across a range of different sectors, helping them to set up sector skills councils from hospitality, tourism, engineering, infrastructure, many other sectors, to shape national level occupational standards, skills standards, so that people that come out of the education system actually have the skills that are needed in today's labor markets. And of course, a focus on green skills in this context is very, very important. And that goes, by the way beyond the energy sector. I think if we look at the energy sector, we know globally about 15 million jobs to be created. That is a drop in the ocean. You know, the green jobs, and they're very much like your focus on greening jobs, the green skills permeate a much, much broader range of jobs. And it's there that we need to focus, from facility management to green infrastructure to green manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. And our clients are actually very interested. And we link that engagement we have with our clients through the loan agreements, through other mechanisms, also to their focus on skills, to their focus on human capital development. So I think as an investor, we can play and are playing now an important role in this context.
It's amazing. And I would like, if I may, also provoke you and perhaps Vic, with this also concept of green skills, how we are able, and ILO has produced a very, I would say, a very thoughtful, complete, exhaustive green skills report already 4 years ago. It's very much advanced. I really like it. But it's tricky to identify the skills that are related to climate change anticipation, isn't it? It's not so simple. And you refer to the sector skills council, which is a great idea, specifically for some countries. You make the business case, you help them to identify those are the skills that you're going to need perhaps in 5 years' time or in 4 years' time. We're now talking about 3 year cycle of anticipation. But it's challenging, isn't it, to identify, you know, for a specific sector how it's going to look like a kind of green skill concept. I don't know whether you have an answer for that or.
Well, it is, but I think the best place to start is with, in our case, with our clients, with key companies in a sector, to better understand where they are now, to undertake skills mapping exercises, to look at projections, where is the sector going, what new technologies are coming, and therefore what new skills will be coming. Another area is, of course, the whole focus on just transition. So this is where, you know, we move away from certain polluting industries towards clean energy sectors. And here we work very carefully with our clients to look at, particularly when it comes to decommissioning. Let me give you a specific example. Last week, we launched the new NUAFI initiative, which focuses particularly in our case on the energy side, on decommissioning of 12 gas-fired power plants in Egypt. That has a direct impact on 6,000 plus workers. So here it's about actually looking at what are the skills these workers have, how transferable are these skills, what are the opportunities in the local labor market, what are the additional opportunities that maybe a green energy supply chain could create in those communities, and therefore what kind of reskilling, upskilling opportunities need to be put in place, new partnerships between employers, between education providers, in order to make that happen. So it really depends on what sector you focus on, what the context is, what the particular challenges are that sector faces in a given country.
And I see that the important thing is not just the concept itself, it's more being aware that there's some particular skill that will be needed in the very short term, even now, and we are going to have a skill shortage very soon, okay?
And I fully agree. I mean, another thing that I would say is we also sometimes have to get away from just looking at qualifications, certifications. It's the non-certified skills that very often are transferable, but are very difficult to capture. So one thing that we are looking to do is to partner with an organization that uses AI to get people to self-certify what skills they can actually bring, and to then match that into the local labor market. So this is for us also a new innovative way of trying to bridge that skills gap that we know exists.
Yeah, that's another debate, the certification, no certification of the informal learning, okay? And also how do you do it also with digital tools, but that's that would take long. But very interesting. Thank you. I'm going to the other side, and I'm not following a specific order, but that's the way. I will start with you, Cassie. What is the urban component of the discussion on employment, the discussion on just transition, how we employers can really help from a city perspective, town perspective, how we can make a difference also with the skills anticipation angle and with the employment angle? Perhaps you can refer to the C40 initiative. I'm not sure that everyone is familiar with it. I have to give you the mic.
Thank you, Roberto. Otherwise, it's just me shouting, and I don't think it has the same effect. But yeah, thanks very much for inviting me today. And maybe I'll start with introducing C40, which is a network of 97 of the world's largest cities who've all come together to tackle climate change. So really using the power of cities and their mayors as real inspiring leaders to be able to take bold action. And I think this skills conversation is actually a perfect one to bring cities into, because they're often the forgotten influencer or decision maker here. And we look to our national governments, national regulators to really be introducing those instruments that are going to have an effect on skills development, on the growth of industries. But actually, cities are huge economic hubs. And some of C40 members, those cities that are 25 million plus, they're real economic hubs. But they're also the home for large markets. And they're conveners of communities, of unions, of businesses, of workers. So you really have a captive audience in a city, and you also have a mayor who understands that city as well, and so can understand where we've got people who maybe are suffering in that city, the people who are prospering, how to be able to bring them together. So I know I work for a city organization, but I think there's huge power in cities, and I think they can bring a lot to this debate on skills. So what are kind of mayors doing on green skills? And I think the just transition, as Barbara just mentioned, is super important in this debate, knowing that as many of our kind of fossil fuel plants are closed down, there will be huge job opportunities for workers in cities, but they will be of a different nature. And how do we prepare that kind of workforce? And I think something that has come up slightly, but maybe not quite so much yet, is really around the multiple benefits of this skills development and job creation as well. Taking examples such as building energy efficiency, being able to reduce energy costs and therefore reduce the impact of energy poverty and hopefully bringing people out of energy poverty, or the stability and long-term signal technology such as renewables have. I do agree that we also need to look at urban nature, but there are a couple of examples on the kind of more energy side. And if I just point back to in the end of October, just last month, we convened a World Mayors Summit in Buenos Aires, where we got a huge number of our mayors together. And these mayors had to drive the creation of 50 million new good green jobs by 2030. I emphasize the good, because I think the point before of just saying these are green jobs doesn't, what's the point of that? But good, fair, green jobs. And by sending that signal, those kind of powers and the political weight of mayors, we hope that will bring communities, governments, business, private sector, all of you along with us to be able to create those jobs. So before I kind of wrap up on that, I think maybe I can point to a couple of examples just to bring this to life. What are cities doing in order to create these jobs and to build the skills that then could also be scaled and replicated by others? So there's a great example in Bogota in Colombia, where they're really focusing on access for women to good green jobs as well, because we know it's not only about increasing the number of jobs, it's about that access to jobs as well. And so in Bogota, they're introducing a whole new fleet of electric buses, and they're training only women to drive them. So giving priority access to women to drive these there'll be around 200 new electric buses within the city. And alongside that, there's a big new urban greening program, developing new parks and new urban nature within the city, and 4,000 women have been trained to support the maintenance of that work. And then just for my new friend Vic on the end, there's a great example in Boston, Vic, around youth access to jobs that you may know about already, but a green jobs focused program really supporting people between 18 and 30 to access not only the training needs, but also career advice. And I think in the last month, we've seen 100 jobs created already. You start small, but really it provides that kind of environment to be able to grow and scale and replicate those programs. So I think I've convinced you, Roberto, that
Yes.
cities are the way forward, right?
So you have now to convince me how we can help you. No, but really, that's my second question. Uh, what is the role of employers with towns, in the urban areas? Do we have a convening power? Do we have an influence? Do we have a capacity also to create this, in the ILO terms, decent jobs? The word, you call them good jobs.
Good jobs, yeah.
Okay. But how we can engage further with towns, and in order to make that happen? I mean, because they also need help, from towns. I mean, you cannot ask any small and medium company to create jobs from one day to the other. I mean, at the end of the day, they need help and support also from the municipalities, isn't it?
Of course, and I think that everybody needs help and to take this agenda as a serious one and put it on all levels of agenda. I think from national governments, we need some regulatory change. We need some large-scale investment. We need those long-term signals. You need them from cities, where cities can provide them too. But I think this is also an opportunity for leadership for employers. I think they can
Sure.
really be true leaders in this.
That's great.
And I think I've given a couple of examples of where also we start small in order to create that leadership. And our whole premise at C40 is built on, if somebody's got a good idea, why don't you steal it and copy it rather than start it yourself, you know? And I think we can have the same thing here, where really we can see that true leadership from employers as well.
You know, I have an idea, but I'll come back to you later because we don't have much time, that has to do with mobility and the way employers and the employers community can help to have a more, environmentally friendly approach for mobility of workers. And we'll come back to you.
Let's talk.
Let's talk. So now I don't want to pronounce badly your name. Yeah, but I want to say it well. Tuli, which means peace, by the way. And you're the deputy director or deputy president, vice president of the CAIMA Commission in South Africa, which has a strong just transition approach. A country like South Africa, I mean, you're linked also to a business organization, BUSA, if I'm not incorrect, and in a country like Africa with a huge informality, which I think is also an important component when we talk about employment and skills. I mean, 60% of the total occupied population in the world is in the informal sector. So if you don't tackle it from this angle, you will never get there. So tell us about your work in the Commission and how you are moving and how we can help also with this employment just transition skills angle.
Thank you very much. Perhaps let me start by explaining a little bit what the Commission is and how it does its work. It is a multi-stakeholder body that was set up by the President to oversee the just transition to a low-carbon economy and climate-resilient society in South Africa generally. The Commission is set out to do a just transition framework that we've done consultations in communities, business, labor, all the sectors that are represented in the Commission to come up with that framework. As part of the framework, there is skills development and employment, which is critical in South Africa. I think if you know anything about South Africa, you know that we have very high unemployment rates and literacy rates as well, not the best. So the issue of skills is really big in South Africa. And so we are engaging in a program now of developing an employment strategy that goes back to skills. And the way we're doing that is looking at our pathways to net zero and what sort of investments are needed and what skills will therefore be needed in order to meet those requirements. And we'll be looking at the data sets to see, modeling both bottom up and otherwise to unpack what is needed. Partnerships are important. I think you mentioned a little bit about partnerships in your question. We will be working with the local TVET colleges once we have understood what sort of skills are needed, because at this point we have an idea, but it's not fully understood. I mean, we are just embarking on green hydrogen, for example, in South Africa. What skills are needed in green hydrogen and how can our education system support that, especially for the youth, because we've got very high unemployment rates as it relates to the youth. How you can help us is partnerships, because of course the Presidential Climate Commission is a facilitator of the national conversation. We don't actually do the work. but we do facilitate partnerships around new skills that are required in the green economy, let me call it that, and what sort of investments need to be made now, and how we then, especially the youth, ensure that they can participate effectively. We have a huge informal sector in South Africa, especially in the current coal value chain, if I can be direct. I mean, coal is coal. Maybe I can say we're all here because of coal, but the reality is that coal has really stimulated the economy with all its other negative impacts. If you, first in South Africa, for example, if you look at a power station, the number of people employed just in the power station, and the number of people employed in the mines that supply the power station, and then the contractors in the space, and then the trucks that bring people, that bring the coal to the station. And then in South Africa, we've got a huge informal sector that supports that whole value chain. And the question is, we have to document that. We have to understand how many people in those sectors will lose their livelihoods. And how do we then make sure that they participate in the just transition in a manner that they can keep their livelihoods and participate actively, good or decent jobs, whatever the case may be. You want the people to participate, and you need to understand the critical things that we need to do in that. So we will be looking for partnerships going forward, and how we can upskill and change our education system to accommodate what we want in the future. Thank you.
Thanks to you. You have, I mean, you don't have to answer this question, but do you have an idea of job losses in the coal sector in Africa, or is there any estimation in the short term?
Well, I don't want to give, incorrect information, but we do have an idea of what overall. We've done sector job resilience plans. We understand how many people are employed, and we also in South Africa have a migration issue. So the people are not
yeah.
only from where they work, they come from other provinces in the country, and so the whole and other neighboring countries as well, because we have Lesotho, Swaziland, all those other countries around us that send labor there. So the just transition issue, although we are working in particular communities to make sure that we don't create ghost towns, it will not only affect those areas, because people are from other areas in the country. And so in the skills and employment conversation, that also needs to be taken into account.
Sometimes are difficult conversations, isn't it?
It's a difficult conversation,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
because some of those informal sector, shall I say, call it jobs, are not documented. You know how many people are employed at the power station, how many truckers, how many contractors, but how many people are on the roadside selling food to those people, for example, making sure that there's dry cleaning and all those other supporting activities. That's the critical part.
I tell you because I come from a region in my country. I'm Spanish, and the coals are closed. But this region is very depressed because they didn't have precisely the just transition policies in place to overcome it. It's now that they start to, but it was a very tough price they have to pay. So that's an important conversation. But last but not least, and thank you for being patient with us. We have a company, and we have a very important company in India. It's Tata. Those who know India know that Tata is a kind of emblematic company in the country, of course in the motor sector, but also in other areas. What's your approach on climate change? How do you link also the employment skills angle in your activity? If you can tell us something about that. And I want to pronounce very, Jotin Kuti. Is that well pronounced?
It's perfect.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So you pronounced it perfectly.
Thank you.
So friends, I come from India, and I represent the Tata Group, and I work for Tata Motors. So what do? We manufacture cars, we manufacture trucks, and trucks of all types: small, big, medium, heavies. So for us, transition means, we need to deal with scope 1, we need to deal with scope 2, we need to deal with scope 3. And amongst the scope 3 emissions, we are talking about tailpipe emissions, which is category 11, which contributes to more than 80-90% of our total emissions. But I just want to actually bring a slightly a nuanced opinion here, that when we're talking about this transition, it's actually a very great opportunity for the world to look at the same set of problems that we are dealing with in the past very differently. So it's not one of doomsday, it's not one of difficulty, but it's one of opportunity. Opportunity of overcoming all the bad habits that we have learned to inherit or grow with, and probably replace them with good habits and good opportunities where we can look at the world very differently. Let me tell you why. The operative word in all these conversations is the word transition. So when we are talking about transition, it's not that suddenly tomorrow morning we get up and say, everybody has lost their jobs, or we are trying to get into a new way of doing things. So it's a planned transition from where we are today. Let's say that our company has declared a net zero ambition at 2045. So we've got 25 years to do what we want to do. And let's assume that we are generating all the emissions today, which stands at 100%. I need to bring to zero. So approximately, on an average, I have to do about 4 or 5% per year. Now, dealing with 4 or 5% per year means I'm de-skilling what they are already doing to the extent of 4%. I'm reskilling to that extent simultaneously. If we do it in a planned manner, there is every opportunity of carrying all people along correctly. And it therefore has to be planned, it has to be executed, and it has to be done well. And if we are able to do that correctly, the doomsday scenario can actually be converted to something which is very positive, which is very encouraging. And not only that, the people who are going to be employed, especially in those sectors in the year 2045, may not be the same sets of people who are employed today. And there is a natural decline of the age of people who are moving down their age and moving away from their current jobs, and new people who are coming into the work stream, which is getting ready for new jobs. So if we were to plan this in a way, the old will give way to the new will get skilled in new areas, and they will get there. So what are we doing in Tata Motors? A few years ago, the government of India decided that we will go from BS4 and we'll get to BS6, which is the equivalent of Euro 4 to Euro 6. We skipped the Euro 5, in India. The question at that point of time is, would we be ready to skip what normally Europe took about 8 or 9 years to do this transition from Euro 4 to Euro 6? The government of India had actually mandated we should do it in 3 years. And the industry was aghast. We really did not know how to go about it, but we took on the challenge. And surely, on the day that it was supposed to get operationalized, the entire industry, the entire the industry of automobiles, took up the challenge, converted ourselves to BS6, and we were there. Now, what does this teach us? It teaches us that if we take a challenge, if we plan for it, the entire industry, the government, and the private sector coming together can make a big difference. Also, this BS1 or pre-BS, pre-Euro to Euro 6, this is a transition that we have taken place in about 20 years. Can you imagine that all our engines and all our products which were running 20 years ago was something that could be repaired in a garage, on the roadside, by the street people, and it was a source of employment. But today, when you're dealing with Euro 6 or BS6, it cannot be done on the roadside. It has to use diagnostics. It has to come to the garage, etc. But in 20 years, we have graduated the entire population and reskilled them, not in my company alone, but across the country, to be able to deal with the pre-Euro or pre-BS transition to BS6. So there is hope in this, and there is a message that I want to leave with the audience, that if the government, the private sector, the people at large, they come together and they recognize that here's an opportunity for change, here's an opportunity for transition, and if we plan it correctly, families participate in this transition correctly, governments participate in the transition correctly, and employers participate in the transition correctly, then we have a winning solution that will make the world sustainable, it will make profit sustainable, and it will make the planet sustainable. So profit sustainability, people sustainability, and the earth sustainability all go hand in hand if we were to handle the transition correctly. And this cannot be done by any one set of individuals. It requires the entire community to come together and see this as an opportunity for change. That's my message to you. It's one of hope, it's one of opportunity, and this is something that the Tatas would like to communicate, that here is an opportunity for good change. Give away your bad habits. improve access, improve jobs, and bring a transition that is just for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the example of, I mean, your company and how you passed from Euro 4 to Euro 6, no, in 2 years. It's a clear example of how, in 3 years, how you have to accelerate also the skills component, isn't it? At the end of the day, I've been reading an article, I think it was in The Economist today, on the software specialists that will be needed in the automobile industry, which is amazing. I mean, in terms of, I mean, it's a total different business model in which you will have, a head of software manager with making the link between the hardware and software, which is no longer vertical but more horizontal. And you cannot plan. I mean, you're talking about planning and support of government, but I'm asking and wondering how you can really plan such a huge dramatic change in the industry. And you have also bad examples. I don't want to mention because it's one of my members. Well, I'm going to tell it, Volkswagen, that perhaps was not dealing that properly or was the first one to do it and did not successfully manage, and then they have now issues.
So let me answer you. There are good examples and bad examples, both. But we have to take hope from the good examples because then we are looking at opportunities for change. Take the case of the engines which were pre-BS, pre-Euro. They were all mechanical engines. But these Euro 6 engines are extremely complex, extremely pieces of computing hardware, which is actually on wheels today. And therefore, training and reskilling and de-skilling the past and reskilling for the present becomes absolutely vital. If you get it right, there's opportunity. If you get it wrong, then the entire community suffers. And there are good examples. There are umpteen bad examples. But we have to really learn from what the good examples taught us and overcome the challenges that the bad examples have put to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I think it has been a very rich conversation. We have some time for questions. I don't know whether is anyone wanted to raise one question. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Laura Schmidt. I'm the scale specialist from the ILO for North Africa. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting panel. I might have two questions, and I feel whoever wants to take them, please take them. So a lot of this green transition is connected with technology advances and technology changes. And a lot of those technologies are quite expensive and not yet very much available in developing countries. I would take India as an exception because India has advanced insanely over the last decade. But talking more about Africa, so what role can the private sector play? If I look at the traditional TVET center structures, that you have TVET centers who definitely don't have access to these technologies. What kind of cooperation between public and private do we need to foster for training to be able that the youth has access to these technologies? Has anybody have experience with simulations or simulators, simulation-based training to allow young people to experience or train on machinery and equipment that they might not be able to purchase? And great to see someone from EBRD and the banks here, because I think you can really leverage a lot of those things. What kind of policy do you have at the moment when you fund infrastructure projects when it comes to also green, like having a green strategy in terms of education with it? Thank you.
Well, I think it's a very challenging question. Two questions, okay? So you helped me in your second question addressing already a particular person in the panel. And then some of you can also answer the other one, which is the low level of technical expertise and the TVET system and how the private sector also can leverage that on developing economies.
Thank you very much. And I will attempt to answer both questions, and then others can, of course, come in. So in relation to what can the private sector do in relation to new technologies? So we are working with our clients. First of all, we invest. So we provide the finance to buy those new technologies and understand which ones are the best ones and to bring them in a sensible way into businesses. But then also we support our clients to then establish vocational training centers or sometimes also partnerships with universities where those companies can actually make that technology available at those centers or even on site for training, for as part of curricula, as part of formal courses at the TVET level or at the tertiary level. So I think those partnerships are well established now increasing. We have clients in the automotive sector, for example, in Turkey, who are doing that. We have clients in the engineering and electrical sector here in Egypt that are doing that. But there are, of course, many, many other examples. So I think it's investors such as us that can trigger the private sector to know how to do that. From my experience, we find that companies are quite happy to do that because they need the people who are then able to apply those technologies, who have the right skills. But often they don't know how to do that. So it's that. On the greening infrastructure, so at EBRD, we have a commitment that all of our activities, and that really goes to activities, everything we do has to be fully Paris aligned by the start of next year. So that includes all of our infrastructure investments, or indeed anything, our own procurement, our canteens, where we source our paper, everything. So that is a huge commitment and one that we are working hard to achieve. But particularly in terms of the infrastructure sector, we look at green jobs, we look at green technologies, and we look at investments that promote a move away from fossil fuels. So this is something that is very much ingrained in what we do in terms of 50% of our investments there do need to have a very clear investment line into green models, into green technologies. And with that comes the skills component, comes the human capital component, and comes also advice to our countries of operation how to change their infrastructure strategies and look at this on a more strategic level as well.
Can I
Yes,
can I add to that? I'll give you two answers. Both of them may not be perfect in themselves, but if you look at both of them together, it'll give you some clues. When we were looking at BS6, we found that training for BS6, Euro 6, was difficult. It was not easy. And when our trucks ply all over India, which is thousands of kilometers, and when they are stuck on the road, dealing with them is not going to be easy. So we used technology. What did we do? We created apps which traditionally, if you look at your car, you would have the owner's manual and it would be a paper manual. So what we did we converted to apps which connects actually through a QR code. Whenever there's a problem, you actually point it out to that, and there is a blinking, and that blinking corresponds to a particular signal. It gets connected to the server, and it gives you a step-by-step guide of how to do it. So once you are able to to break up an activity into a series of activities which is video and voice enabled, and it is dealt with and expert supported from a remote location, it becomes easier for the person on the ground to be able to handle it. So his knowledge, what is expected to be 100%, you can deal with about 10-15% knowledge which is guided by an expert somewhere else. This is one answer. The second answer is to incentivize in such a way that he becomes an entrepreneur. He becomes an owner of the problem by which he is making money. So for example, if I am a private individual and my car is broken down and I get in touch with this gentleman and he finds that there's an opportunity to become an entrepreneur, he earns money from that conversation, then he wants to skill himself to a degree that his levels become better. We enable this, and we have created these advisors all over India who are private individuals actually, and they are trained through these apps. They are trained remotely. They come to us to the service centers to learn, and then they go back. And then when there's a car broken down, the person whose car is broken down or the truck which is broken down connects with this person, and he is able to make some amount of money in that transaction, and therefore there's an incentive for him to become better and better and better. So these 2-3 things combined provides an answer which probably is not a perfect answer to your question, but gives you an indirect answer to how we have been able to deal with in India. Thank you.
Are you satisfied with the answers? In general terms, not the perfect one. Any other question? Okay.
Hi, hi, it's Robert from the IOE. Thank you all for being here. I just have 2 questions. one for the South African experience. I'm just curious a bit to hear a little bit more about how the Presidential Climate Commission works with the different stakeholders, and what are the expectations of the Commission from on the one hand the private sector, on the other hand potentially the unions, or are there any, what does everybody bring to the table? And if I understand correctly, it's the government who at the end leads the whole thing. And then the other question is perhaps for Karen and Giotin. I'm wondering, one thing that I find interesting when we talk about green skills and reskilling is that at the end of the day, most companies won't, fire their full current workforce and then hire new work. They're most likely going to reskill in some way their existing workforce and adapt them to the new processes, new services. How does a company like Tata Motors see this in relation to a company like Adecco, which is in recruitment services? And how does Adecco see this challenge of, on the one hand, providing new workers from the outside, or perhaps, a couple of experts who can then retrain an existing workforce, or perhaps even working in more longer midterm with companies that need new skills? I was just curious about those dynamics, yeah.
Thank you. I think that your question is, how does the Presidential Climate Commission work? It is set up to handle the difficult conversations around the just transition. I mean, I think if you know South Africa, you know the history of difficult conversations that we've had even to get to where we are just in our political system. And so the way that we work is we bring all the social partners together. The commission is not an expert commission like you have in other countries. It's a multi-stakeholder with all the parties that are involved in the just transition. Informed by the best available science, we have working groups that deal with the science and provide it to the commission to make decisions. So the expectation is really, if I can use my own interpretation, is to create a safe space for that conversation to happen, and for the different parties to agree on what needs to happen for us to get to where we need to go. So the just transition framework that we have produced now is like the blueprint, the vision on board. All social partners agreed. It's not an easy thing in South Africa to get social partners to agree. You have labor, business, NGOs, everybody has agreed that this is what we want to do in South Africa in terms of the just transition. So that's the mandate that the president has given the commission. Deal with the difficult conversations, get the social partners to agree, take us forward, oversee this just transition, and give us the necessary recommendations for policy in government and for business and all the other sectors. And if you look squarely on the issues of skills, indeed, the commission must broker those partnerships between the private sector and the TVET colleges and whoever else is a player in this space to develop the skills that we need for the future. Yeah.
And one example of that is we've been working closely with the Presidential Climate Commission and 5 cities in South Africa, Durban, Cape Town, Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Johannesburg. And the Climate Commission has really been helping us support cities to have a voice at that table, exactly as Thuli just described. And that importance, those large cities, those urban economic centers in South Africa, and the impact on the residents of those cities, it's really vital that they have this role and voice at the table and have a say in setting how this green transition and this just transition will be set. So yeah, it's been a fabulous partnership so far.
Thank you for the question, Robert. The advantage of the Adecco Group is that we're working along the full talent value chain. So on the one hand, we recruit and place about 1.2 million people into jobs every single day, but we also upskill and reskill a couple of 100,000 people every year. So to your point, we work very closely with our clients to understand their skills needs and the gaps that they have, to then support them in upskilling and reskilling their existing workforce. Because it's not just more economically beneficial for an organization, because it's very difficult to find the talent in the market, upskill and reskill them into the roles, but then also train them on the job until they're really sort of performing to the level that they've been hired for. So for companies, it's very interesting to upskill and reskill their existing workforce. It's also much more socially beneficial, right? So I think this is one of the examples where we can truly say it's shared value. And that's where we're working very closely with our clients on that. On the recruitment side, I think we already see there's a huge bottleneck in terms of talent. It is then around finding the talent in the market or finding people in the market, and much more so it's now also from underrepresented groups. How can we help them access the labor market and fill those talent gaps, whether it's refugees, whether it's women who've been removed from the labor market, it's youth not in education, training, or employment, and then really preparing them for the jobs that are existing in the market. And that's where I think many of us have mentioned that the ecosystem approach is so incredibly important. We don't just want to skill into a void, but we want to skill into jobs that exist. And I think that's why it's important to work with clients directly to understand where their talent and skills gaps are, to then specifically train people into the jobs that exist. And that's what we're doing on a daily basis together with our clients. But I think we need to do much, much more in terms of prioritizing these activities, finding the right investment from a policy perspective, from a funding perspective, and then also from an accountability perspective.
Thank you.
If I can just touch on one point. We talk about Africa, there's about 80% of your private sector is informal. So it's a huge challenge. Now, when we go forward, what we need is governments to upgrade their education policies. We're producing unemployable youth. And unless governments can change the education system, it's going to be difficult to meet the needs that the private sector is asking for those skill sets. And so there's going to have to be a close liaison between the private sector and the government regarding what are those skill sets that are needed in the future. And it's a lifelong learning process. What you learn now in 10 years could be redundant. And so you have to inculcate into the individual that you're going to have to keep upgrading your skills. And those are key elements that we haven't tackled in effect yet in some of the developing regions. And that's something we need to get right. Last point is we have a project with LinkedIn, the ILO, where we're looking at what are the future skill sets that are needed. So we can advise governments to say, these are the areas that you need to start looking at for the future. And that's where we need to start working together with the private sector.
To add to that, I think what we also need to look at, that we're not just looking at it in isolation as individual companies, but also as industries, and then also not just locally, but also across different geographies. I think the automotive industry, particularly in Europe, they have some amazing examples that we've been working with them as well to look at, as we're moving from fuel-driven engines, and I'm clearly not a car driver, so I don't know the appropriate language, but as we're moving sort of to electric vehicles, there's a different skill set that is required, and that is common across the industry. So as an industry, they're investing in building the capabilities and the capacity to build that talent. And then the other question is around geographies, right? I think, Cassie, you mentioned it, where jobs might be lost in a specific area, but then they're created in another one. So I think that's where another role for governments and cities comes into play, to say, how do we create active labor market policies to also enable the mobility of talent across the different geographies, so that the talent can actually go where the jobs are being created.
I think it has been a very exciting conversation, really. More importantly, it's a very exciting engagement. And that's what I take from here. I mean, really, we look forward also to engage with you for efficient partnerships with some ideas we have already in mind, but please don't forget us, because we are going to follow you in the coming days, in the coming weeks. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you to the audience.